If you're watching this video, you've probably chewed gum before, but did you know that the modern chewing gum was invented when a Mexican general was exiled to Staten Island? You probably didn't, but it's true. If a Mexican general hadn't been given the Continental timeout, we wouldn't have chewing gum today, and that's just ironic considering how many kids have been given timeouts for chewing gum. This is Munchables, and today we'll be tracing the history of the modern chewing gum and how its invention was caused by the exile of a Mexican general. First off, let's clear some things up. The concept of chewing gum isn't a Mexican invention. The concept of chewing gum is almost as old as human history itself, and there's evidence that Northern Europeans were chewing bark tar as early as 90,000 years ago. It wasn't native to Europe either, as North American Indians used to chew spruce tree resin. However, as you'd expect, these substances are markedly different from what we chew as chewing gum today. What we call chewing gum today is quite modern and could actually be said to have been a Mexican invention. Mexico is known for many things: tacos, tortillas, burritos, tequila, mariachi bands, and Cinco de Mayo. All these things are things that you readily associate with Mexico. However, there's one thing that you almost certainly have never associated with Mexico, and that's chewing gum. The gum that you know and love today, or hate if you're a teacher or a parent, wouldn't have been possible if a certain Mexican general hadn't gotten exiled. And who was that Mexican general? His name was General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, and he was a man of destiny. Wait, that's not rhetoric. That's literally what historians call him, a man of destiny. Now, they don't call him a man of destiny because he invented the modern chewing gum. No. In fact, inventing the modern chewing gum is probably the least of his achievements. According to most historians, he was a man who loomed over his time like a melodramatic colossus, the uncrowned monarch. Wow, what high praise! But what did Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna do to deserve this praise? And how did all of this lead to the invention of the modern chewing gum? Well, to learn that, you'll have to stay glued to this video. Santa Anna was one of the most important figures in Mexican history and was an energetic, enigmatic, and controversial man. He was the general that had the honor of serving as president of Mexico 11 non-consecutive times over a 22-year period. The story of Santa Anna isn't one that is flattering, but what you can't say is that it isn't colorful or interesting. When Santa Anna wasn't president, he was busy being one of the most iconic military leaders on the continent. He was seen as a hero by his soldiers, and he regularly fought wars for glory for himself and for Mexico. He did all this despite the fact that he used to support Spanish imperialism earlier in his career. In fact, legend says that if you look up flexible in the dictionary, you'll find a picture of Santa Anna right next to it. Despite the fact that Santa Anna was notorious for changing his positions of issues of great consequence, he still maintained his position as a high-ranking general for most of his life. To show us how flexible Santa Anna could be, you should know that he betrayed not one, but two emperors. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, you're probably General Santa Anna of Mexico. Have you ever been tricked twice by the same person? Quickly, tell us in the comments section below. Tell us why you fell for the trick the second time. And who knows, we might just tell you how to avoid falling for it a third time. Now, back to the story. But treachery wasn't the only thing that Santa Anna was known for. He was also known for being shockingly efficient at raising field armies. However, these armies had weapons that were no better than clubs. So, yes, he was able to field an army of hundreds of thousands, but these hundreds of thousands regularly saw defeat. He once lost an army of about 10,000 men within just 40 days. That's some military-grade efficiency, if we were being honest. In just 14 years, he lost 5 major battles to the Americans and the Texans. How did this guy ever become general? Interestingly, these defeats did nothing to the social status of Santa Anna. Even though he was regularly defeated by the United States, yes, he faced 3 presidents in battle and managed to lose against them in particularly stunning fashion. He still managed to paint himself a war hero. His military failures and his centralist rhetoric ensured that Mexico would lose a huge chunk of its territory during his reign. In a twist of fate, he also managed to lose a huge chunk of his leg while bumbling across the battlefield. In fact, it wasn't just a chunk of his leg. It was his entire left leg from the knee down. This happened when, during yet another military retreat after a failed attack, he was hit in the ankle by cannon fire. In true Santa Anna fashion, he decided to gather up the remainder of his leg and give it a burial with a full military regalia. However, in true Santa Anna fashion as well, his enemies managed to find the burial ground of his feet, dug the carcass up, and dragged it across the middle of the road with pomp and pageantry. But the story of Santa Anna wasn't always one of incompetence. When fighting against Spanish imperialists in his early years, he recorded relative success. However, his problems started with the Texas Revolution of 1836 and began to grow exponentially until they culminated at the Mexican Cession of 1948. Even after this debacle and utter failure, Santa Anna returned to the presidency in 1853. To make matters even worse, Santa Anna, after becoming president, advised the United States on how to take more of Mexico's territory. All this was done when he was negotiating with the U.S. Army after yet another disastrous military campaign. But why would Santa Anna even do this? Being a terrible general is no excuse to be a traitor, you'd say. Ordinarily, that would be true, but Santa Anna wasn't only an incredibly flexible, for lack of a better word, politician and general, he was also an extremely corrupt one. He misused public funds throughout his career and made himself very wealthy. As president of Mexico, he facilitated the sale of California to the U.S. for $30 million, and he pocketed half of $5 million Gadsden purchase money from the United States. But that's not all. He also sold Indians into slavery to Cuba at 25 pesos a head. So yes, Santa Anna was pretty much the worst. But even the worst things don't last forever. Santa Anna, despite declaring himself a dictator and the most serene highness, was overthrown from office in 1855, after which he went into exile. And this was exactly when the journey into the production of chewing gum would begin. But first, karma had to do some work on Santa Anna. While on exile in New York, he had the misfortune of falling into the hands of swindlers who cheated him out of most of his fortune. It was during this time that Santa Anna decided that he would be able to make a fortune off chicle, a kind of sap that would be a substitute for rubber. While he was in New York trying to convince U.S. wheel manufacturers to buy his idea, he hired the future founder of the chewing gum industry, a man named Thomas Adams. The job of Adams was simple: help make me and you rich. Thomas Adams was to help in the experiments that would be able to prove to American businessmen that chicle would be a great replacement for rubber. Santa Anna wanted chicle to be used in buggy tires, but unfortunately, even with the help of Thomas Adams, he was unable to convince U.S. wheel manufacturers that chicle would be more useful than the materials they were currently using. While working for Santa Anna, Thomas noticed that the general would often chew a piece of the chicle sap. When the errant general figured out that his mission would be unsuccessful and the U.S. wheel manufacturers had no use for him in his plant, he decided to leave New York. However, before he left, he gave the rest of his chicle to Thomas. He obviously didn't do this out of the goodness of his heart, but out of the fact that the plant had proven to be largely useless. While Santa Anna abandoned the idea of chicle for buggy tires, Thomas Adams had an idea growing in his head. He got to experimenting and discovered that even if the plant couldn't be useful in tires, it could be useful in other ways. He made this discovery when visiting a drugstore. At the drugstore, he overheard the shopkeeper selling some chewing gum. This piqued his curiosity, and he asked the shopkeeper what sort of gum was on offer. The shopkeeper said that the gum was a pretty low quality and that it was a paraffin wax gum made by John Curtis. It was at this exact moment, and it struck Thomas Adams, that chicle may not be as useful as rubber, but it would make extremely good gum. He returned a day later with a piece of chicle and asked the shopkeeper to try it. The shopkeeper loved it, and Thomas decided that he would try to convert chicle into suitable gum. Over the next few years, with the help of his family, he was able to perfect the process of turning the chicle plant into the modern chewing gum we know of today. One of the biggest stumbling blocks on the part of Thomas was the infusion of flavor into the gum, but even that stumbling block was cleared in time. Thomas Adams and his sons formed the Adams Sons and Company and sold Adams New York Gum. snapping and stretching. Within a few years, Thomas Adams's chicle-based gum became so popular that in an argument against prohibition, Nikola Tesla claimed that chewing gum was more dangerous than alcohol. Little by little, Thomas's company began to grow, and at the turn of the century, chicle had become the base for chewing gums the world over. Thomas later partnered with William Wrigley, and they both built one of the most successful chewing gum dynasties ever. The chicle-based gum developed by Santa Ana and Thomas Adams went on to be used as the gum base for most commercially viable gums. It even lasted until the 50s and only went out of fashion when synthetic polymers, a kind of rubber, were deemed to be a better substitute. Don't you think it's ironic that Santa Ana and Thomas Adams took interest in chicle in order to make it a viable substitute for rubber, and then it got replaced by a kind of rubber nearly 100 years later? As for Adams, he lived to become extremely wealthy. By 1926, he was worth over $2 million, which is equivalent to $20 million in today's currency. Unfortunately, or fortunately perhaps, the same couldn't be said for Santa Ana. He left New York before chicle became commercially viable, and he returned to Mexico a crippled and destitute old man suffering from severe cataracts. He tried, even at this point in his life, to seize power again and become president, but he was very unsuccessful. The new generation of Mexicans had no love for him, and the Mexican government made a huge show of ignoring him at the anniversary of the Battle of Churubusco. Santa Ana died in his home in Mexico City on June 21, 1876, at age 82. He'd outlasted the Republic of Texas, two emperors, the Confederacy, and the Second Empire of Napoleon III. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to earn a penny from the chewing gum industry that he was largely responsible for developing. Despite the fact that Santa Ana made a career from coming out of failure smelling like a rose, he wasn't able to convert the last failure of his life into anything worthwhile. Sometimes we think karma doesn't exist, and then we learn about stories like that of Santa Ana's and discover that it really does, and it's always just around the corner. The idea for this video was sent in by a subscriber. If you enjoyed it, remember to like and subscribe to the channel, and if you want to know more about a particular food brand, send it to us. Who knows, our next video might be of that food brand. This is Munchable, and it's bye from us. Remember to stay safe.